Thank you. Good morning. Nice to see you all. Nice to see a few familiar faces. My name is Jack Davison. I'm EVP at 3Vision, and I am here today to talk to you about maximising the return on content investments in the new distribution landscape. A very snappy title. What I'll try to talk to you about today is how content owners, content distributors are evolving what they are doing to make the most money they can. This is in the context of a very changing and evolving marketplace that we find ourselves in. We've seen, well, the market sees, our marketplace has seen shifts forever since the invention of the TV. But more recently, obviously, we've seen SVOD take a few hits. We've seen a sort of revitalized or growing AVOD and fast business. We've arguably seen a revitalized broadcaster business. And the marketplace is changing in many ways. And I think it's a good time to have these discussions and look at how the content owners are doing things differently. I'm only putting this up because we were 20 yesterday. It was actually, yesterday was 20 years ago. The company was formally formed, and I think it's good to stop and take a moment to think about that. I did think about this presentation, about doing it slightly differently, and actually doing a presentation about all the red lines that we had in our world from the last 20 years that have been crossed more recently in terms of how you could do deals, because I think that would actually probably make for a good narrative. But we've been around 20 years helping businesses in lots of different sectors and areas, and I can say for myself it's been a fascinating 20 years, and I hope there'll be even more change that we can talk about like we will today. But if you're asking the question, how can you maximize the amount of money you make in what we've called an omni-channel environment, there are lots of things you can talk about. There have always been lots of things you can talk about. It hasn't really changed. And here we can cover off movies and everything else, but I think the changes that we've all faced sometimes have been quite disruptive, and we've seen technology changing all the way through, and how all the businesses and how our content distributors have changed. So from the 50s when the remote control came along, 70s/80s when the VHS and home video came along, 90s I guess when the internet came along, noughties when I guess you got PVRs, streaming technologies and so on. And then I guess then it gets an interesting time from sort of 2010 onwards when all the businesses started doing different things. And we've seen a huge amount kind of I keep using the word change, I have to think of another word, of change where you've had companies go bust, like Blockbuster. You've had companies like Pay TV launching TV everywhere, broadcasters launching catch-up, the list goes on. We've seen Netflix turn from postal DVD into a global streamer. And I guess more recently, and I think probably what is the real context of the discussion today, is D2C. Obviously, D2C, behind D2C is a whole bunch of different technologies, probably mostly kind of OTT and the advancements in streaming technologies. But D2C has made it a very different market for distributors. It's meant that they can make, put together, curate, and serve content directly to consumers themselves. And they can do that in lots of different ways. And we see that now. It isn't just about SVOD. And it isn't just, well, you can launch SVOD, but what type of SVOD? You can launch AVOD, but what type of AVOD? You can still do things, you can distribute things from a linear point of view. There are many options available to everybody. And we are seeing how the content owners distribute to those, changing quite subtly in places at the moment, but maybe less so in others. So what you're looking at here on the left-hand side is just a representation, really, of studios going D2C. It's the premieres of first window TV series in about 11 global markets. And if you look at that yellow line, hopefully you can see it, that is the cumulative increase in premieres by studio SVOD services. So that represents the launch of services like Peacock, HBO Max, Disney Plus in different markets, and well, there was others at the time, but this is for scripted. And the studios were pretty focused on that. We talked about this last year. In fact, I think I probably showed an earlier version of that chart last year. And all eyes were on subscriber growth, the graph on the right-hand side, chasing subs. But as we all know, and as the investment community and the commentators like to talk about, 2022 was a rocky year. Not only was everyone eyes on Netflix, the numbers on the right-hand side, who had a pretty horrible start to the year and a pretty flat year, but actually ended up. But on the left-hand side, you can really see the tech and media stocks taking a hammering throughout 2022. And as a result, as I think it was either my brother or someone else who works in finance said to me, without saying to me, dummy, the price of money has got greater now, and as a result, kind of things have changed, and people have to cut costs. Sadly, first thing that normally goes in tech and media is jobs, but the pressure's on, and they're all kind of rethinking what they're doing and evolving their strategies. Not only is the investment community that everyone has to think of, but also this is just the US, but it's just a couple of data points on basically how unrelentingly competitive the video market in the US is. On the left-hand side, that's Nielsen's share of total US streaming time, just shows what everyone's fighting for. If you want to stop churn, you've got to get people watching it. And on the right-hand side, that's I think it's Antenna's data on churn, which just shows that rather complicated, horrifying red line, which everyone wants to avoid because you lose a customer, you got to gain another, and it's that age-old challenge that they're all facing. But the studios made their bet, and there's lots of different ways you can look at this and talk about this, but the bet's not off. A lot of the studios are still very much involved in D2C and still very much focused on what they're doing in SVOD as well. But they're definitely hedging. This is just their subs growth numbers, and really beneath that, you can see how challenging the US market itself, the domestic US market is for subscribers, how kind of flat it is for some. You can see for Disney, the big challenge they're going to have with India after losing the cricket rights that they had. The challenge is ongoing, but we know, and everyone knows who's in the content market, the way they are acting and interacting with people around content is changing. The doors are not shut to buying content off Disney. Disney is probably of all of them quite unique, but and the doors are very much open, and the emails are definitely flying around from Warner in terms of selling content because they have a great big debt mountain to serve. Here, what you're looking at is the percentage of content that these studios sell to their own services in each TV season since the 2018-19 TV season. In some cases, it reads pretty sensibly and logically. So Disney, as soon as they launched Disney Plus, they did pipeline their content directly to themselves. So they were not selling to third parties, and everything was going pretty much on Disney Plus. From a Paramount, and to some extent with Disney, that is still true, but they're working hard to figure out what they can do with second windows and library content much more now than they were before. And this represents first window premieres at this stage. If you look at Paramount, that big jump of 80% in first windows pretty much represents a combination of new markets for Paramount Plus and their Sky Showtime JV with NBC Universal. Lionsgate, I'll come back next year and I'll show you, and that 82% will have collapsed right to the bottom because, as probably most of you know, they've shut Stars in 9 markets, I think most of which are included in the 12 markets from this data. So the bet is off for them in all of those markets in terms of selling content. Warner, we'll come back to and talk to in a minute, but obviously this represents kind of where they are, where they've launched, and actually it reflects where they've launched and where they're probably not going to launch now, which is very clear in 3 more recent markets, which I'll bring up in a second, but less clear in others. And NBCU, fit in a bit of a hybrid world, what they always did. Obviously, they own Sky, they're a venture partner in Sky Showtime, so there are different ways they are pipelining content themselves, but they're very much selling content in the same way that Sony always have done, as their well-publicized aim to be an arms dealer. But what I'd like to just go through now is a few examples of how kind of these hybrid distribution relationships are going to work. And one of the ways is through different cooperations and different partnerships to suit markets. I think we talked about it last year. There isn't a single global blueprint for these people. Probably the closest is Disney, but for everyone else there isn't. Here you've got Paramount Plus, that Paramount are involved that have launched in throughout numerous markets. A standalone OTT service, kind of normal device availability, normal sort of activity trying to find partners and bundles in with telcos and IPTV players. Then you've got the Sky and NBC joint partnership, not joint venture, in Sky pay TV markets. That covers about 100 million homes in effectively German, Italian and UK markets, German-speaking markets. Here, the whole Paramount proposition is bundled within the premium Sky Cinema tier of Sky, so that is available for no extra charge for to the Sky customers. And then it's also resold in the markets. And then finally, another way to fit in and work in different markets, the JV Sky Showtime between NBC and Paramount, which is in all the markets outside of the Sky pay TV markets. They're mutually exclusive of each other. And that includes the OTT service of Paramount Plus, and it includes the NBC content pipeline, which includes things like Peacock Originals. But notably, it won't necessarily include all of it. A large share of it, but not all of it. And if you look at... Let's just talk about movies for a minute. If you look at movies, movies played a fundamental part in the pay TV proposition. This is what this is showing is over the last 4 years, who premiered in the first window the movies across 12 markets or across the globe. And you can see quite drastically the drop of pay TV premieres of movies. Now, this has a big implication. It's a high ARPU product. It's a key kind of marketing and exclusive content product for the pay TV operators. But what we got to think about now is, yes, they've lost share in terms of premiering first paid movies. Yes, SVOD has increasingly been the destination for movies, and actually, kind of last year, 36% of those were on studio SVOD services, the likes of HBO Max and Disney. But we have to remember now that in the new way that SVOD is operating, they are frequently bundling themselves within these pay TV operators' environment. So as we've already said, you've got Paramount Plus within the Sky Cinema bundle. You've got Canal has got their large cine series bundle, and so all of these services, even though they've actually moved home, they've moved to a studio SVOD service. A lot of them are actually still available within the same proposition, allowing these operators, like Paramount in this instance, to effectively hedge in terms of what they're doing. What this chart, I think hopefully you can see it, there's quite a lot of numbers on it. It shows the very simple change in the windowing paradigm for Paramount movies in the UK. There is actually quite a lot that goes on in between theatrical and first window. I should point out around EST and rental, but that really probably would be too much for today. But you can see how in the old days, Paramount used to sell their movies to Sky in the first window, then they'd go to Netflix in the second window, and then they'd end up on free TV on Channel 4 in the UK. With the launch of Paramount Plus, you can see how that's changed. So Paramount movies in the main, but you can see not always, launch on Paramount Plus first. Remember, though, that Paramount Plus is part of the Sky Cinema bundle. So through Paramount Plus, those Sky Cinema customers can see that. Not to overcomplicate it, it's not part of Now TV, and it's not part of the older Sky set-top box offers, but which is a small but significant factor. But if you see near the end from when Screen 5 starts, you can see that kind of, yes, Screen 5 was on Paramount Plus, but then it was also on Sky Cinema separately. The same goes for Jackass Forever, the same goes for Top Gun Maverick, and in some instances, with Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and The Lost City, they actually went on Sky first. So I have no insight at all into the deal between Sky and Paramount Plus, but you can sure as hell bet that they've got some picking mechanism in terms of who gets which movie and how it works. Showing another example of how there can be a hybrid future between D2C and content sales. Just skipping over to TV, you can see the same transition. It's the same thing. Kind of a lot of the content's gone onto Studio SVOD. A lot of the content's just basically gone onto SVOD. But again, the propositions are evolving with pay TV. A lot of those are now appearing as part of pay TV propositions, either as a added buy-on or in some cases bundled. But I just quick to show really kind of this is a classic kind of example finally of showing kind of some of the fruits of the new management at HBO, at Warner Brothers Discovery, as they're trying to serve their debt. Kind of 3 deals, all in the first quarter of this year, all 2 of which spelling almost definitely the kind of that there's no future for HBO Max in those markets, with Japan and the Middle East, where Warner know they can make the best amount of money there by selling to those 2 partners that they've had for a while. And then in the middle with Foxtel in Australia, there's a slightly hybrid deal. Again, yes, they've done a long-term renewal, multi-year deal, so they know that kind of the best source of cash for Warner in Australia is to renew that deal with Foxtel. But there is an element in that deal they haven't been massively clear about where they will launch some form of HBO Max, and they'll do that with Foxtel as a partner. And if you just think about also briefly, we're talking about how the distributors can maximize. Paramount actually have, in terms of everything they're doing with Paramount Plus, they're actually carving up their pipeline. So if you've got a Paramount Plus commission, it goes on Paramount Plus. If you've got a Showtime commission, it goes on Paramount Plus. If you've got a CBS network show commission, which is their network, their business in the States, those are going pretty much to the open market, so people can still buy those. So it's just an example of how you can work differently with your pipeline as well. I wanted to mention broadcast just before we get close to wrapping up, and also the world of fast, because no one else is talking about that. But from a broadcast point of view, what this shows on the right and trending, and on the left, generally in the pie chart, is the fact that very little content that is shown by the broadcasters is just shown in a basic linear form with basic catch-up. They're enhancing it. They're offering it either with a box set side by side or a stacked box set, or they're offering it as a box set only, not on linear, or in some cases they're offering it on their adjacent SVOD service, so the RTL Pluses of the world and others. And this is important because in my previous charts, you know, we've been talking about first windows. So when we start talking about fast, that's less relevant of a discussion. And you won't have really seen much of AVOD mentioned on the previous slides. And that's because fundamentally, most of this is AVOD. There are some state broadcasters who aren't offering advertising with their catch-up, but it is essentially AVOD. People like to call it BVOD and broadcaster VOD. And this has a huge implication on the development of AVOD and the development of the fast market, especially outside of the US, because the leverage with the content in what is effectively a free TV window, at the first free TV window, is still with the broadcasters. They still have control over a lot of the content. Not all of it. There's still a lot of library. There's still a lot of catalogue, and there are some other kind of more standout initiatives. But they play an important role and will, in particular outside of the US, play a very important role in fast. What I haven't mentioned yet is, yes, kind of the content owners, as well as kind of changing the way they're offering their SVOD and their pipelining content in direct consumer with SVOD, they're also getting involved with fast. This takes a brief look at the left here on just a split of genres and a little bit of the single IP channels by genre. In the US, this is a set of channels we track that out of our fast tracker service. I think there's about 1,500 channels that track across 10 services there. About 500 of those, about a third of those, are news. I'm not saying they're not relevant, and I'm not saying they're not watched by a lot of people, but a lot of the time you've got to take those out of the analysis, because otherwise people look at huge chunks of volumes launching and more launching. We need to be clear where they're kind of retransmission of local news services as well. But what's more interesting is who's doing these channels, because what it points to is the different opportunities that are available to the content distributors in terms of exploiting fast. So it is complicated in the States because the major broadcasters are owned by studios, but about 50% of the channels in the US are owned by or businesses that are already broadcast businesses. 30% of them are the major broadcasters owned by studios. Actually, 21% of those are Paramount, reflecting their Pluto initiatives. Then you've got the indie distributors, you've got the fast AVOD specialists, and you've got the digital publishers. Just before I run out of time, just two little things. One is kind of Warner. There's a lot of stories about Warner's new channels on Tubi, the strangely branded sort of Warner Brother TV channels. They made a huge deal about Westworld being put on fast, and I'd like, if anyone can guess where they think Westworld appears on any one of those channels. I think it's by no means clear. It's really fascinating they didn't want to signpost it and maybe launch a Westworld channel. But anyway, what's happened here is Warner have licensed their content to Tubi to launch those channels on Tubi in the US. That just illustrates the different opportunities available in FAST. You could launch your own, take it out to the distributors, try and get it distributed. You could sell your content to an aggregator. You could sell your content to another service. You could partner with an OEM and launch a partnership channel with an OEM. And I think we need to focus on those a little bit more to understand how the owners are doing this. In the UK, the numbers are there are some interesting differences and anomalies, but for the sake of time, what I wanted to just look at was there's only about 10% of the channels in the UK are fast AVOD specialists, which due to the lack of data in the fast world, kind of guilty as charged. People talk a lot about the volume of channels, which is only one thing. It's not viewing and it's not anything else, which is much more important. And you sure as hell know that in that fast AVOD specialist, for example, in the UK, you've got channels like Samsung's American Idol channel, big partnership channel. Fremantle licensed them their content. Fremantle probably made a nice amount of money licensing that content to Samsung. That channel is probably doing really well because it's well promoted, it's well positioned. But it just fits in that little slice down there. And it's just another example of how studios and businesses can, as I say, try and get their content everything, everywhere, all at once. But just as a wrap up, it's very much a hybrid world. Things are not settled. There's no way things are settled. There'll be more change. There always is. Thank God for us as consultants. But there is clearly much more strategic thinking. And you got to just sort of who you're going to sell to, where you're going to sell, where might you serve, who you're going to serve it to. There are many more elements that we will have to try and track. And that is about it. I'm afraid I've probably run out of time for questions. Sorry.